Have you ever heard the sound of a bleeding empire? Because that's what echoed in the marble corridors of the palace of Augustus when the news arrived. 3 legions, obliterated, 20,000 men wiped off the face of the earth in a single ambush, their bones abandoned in the mud, their eagles captured as trophies of derision by the very barbarians whom the Romans judged inferior. The most powerful man in the world banged his fists against the walls, not as an emperor, but as a father who lost children. "Varro, give me back my legions!" But Germania's silence responded with mockery. That was not just a military defeat. It was an open wound in the soul of Rome. And every wound cries out for vengeance. Rome stopped. The entire empire was plunged into mourning and terror. The invincible machine had been humiliated by tribes considered savages. In the temples, priests performed urgent rituals. Statues of Augustus were said to weep blood, that the gods had turned their faces. The people whispered, "Rome is cursed." But in the heart of the old emperor, another certainty was forming. The only acceptable offering would be Germanic blood. Germania will be punished at the right time. The shame of Teutoburg could not simply be forgotten. It would be carved into the soul of Rome like a scar that would never close. Emperor Augustus, aged and shaken, ordered immediate reinforcements to the Rhine borders. He feared that the Germanic victory would inflame the boldness of the tribes and lead to an invasion of Gaul. Veteran legionnaires, experienced generals, and emergency resources were mobilized. The order was clear. No new tragedy would be tolerated. But something even more symbolic was done. The decimated legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, would never be reconstituted. Their numbers were erased from the records, as if silence could erase the horror. Instead, new legions would emerge, shaped for a different war. Not to the broad plains of Gaul or the deserts of the East, but to the living labyrinths of the Germanic Forest, where ambush was a religion. When Augustus died in 14 AD, the flame of vengeance passed into even more resolute hands. Tiberius, the new emperor, was not a politician. He was a cold-blooded strategist, forged on the frontiers. He knew every valley, every river, every damned trail in Germania. But even Tiberius knew that to restore Rome's honor, power was not enough. Someone with brilliance was needed, with charisma, thirsty for justice, and that name was Germanicus. Before continuing, if this story is stirring you, if the pain of Rome, the thirst for revenge, and the weight of honor have bound you this far, then you are already part of that legion of memory. Show the algorithm what content like this needs to live. Leave your like now. It's the shield that protects this channel from forgetting. Sign up and turn on notifications, because the next battles, revelations, and secrets of ancient Rome won't just be videos. They will be marches, and you, legionnaire, cannot be left behind. Germanicus was not just any general. He was the man the gods seemed to have molded for a single mission: to avenge Rome. Adopted son of Tiberius, grandson of Mark Antony, he carried in his veins the weight of dynasties and on his shoulders the expectation of an entire empire. Young, cultured, fluent in Greek, admired in the Senate and adored by the people. But what really distinguished him was something that could not be learned in the marble halls of Rome. It was his silent fury, his fiery gaze. When he heard the name Teutoburg, Tiberius knew that vengeance needed a living incarnation. And he handed over to Germanicus the supreme command of the legions stationed on the Rhine. The young general assumed the leadership of 8 legions, more than 30,000 soldiers, with a single mission that did not need to be told: to recover the lost eagles and destroy the man who had wounded Rome, Arminius the traitor. In the spring of 14 AD, just weeks after Augustus's death, Germanicus crossed the Rhine. But his sword did not advance for glory. It was for justice. It was by memory. The first campaign was a brutal warning. Villages burned, fields destroyed, corpses strewn with smoke. It was not an achievement, it was a message. Every drop of Germanic blood was a letter addressed to the past. Rome did not forget. The following winter was not one of rest. It was obsessive planning. Germanicus, with maps scattered on the walls of his tent, studied every step of the enemy. He interrogated prisoners, analyzed testimonies from the survivors of Teutoburg, and listened to every whisper coming from the allied tribes. He knew he couldn't repeat Varro's mistakes. He knew that Arminius, as brilliant as he was cruel, was waiting for him. In 15 AD, Germanicus began the real campaign of revenge. But it would not be a blind march through the forest. Rome had learned. This time, the war would be a lethal choreography. He divided his forces into two fronts. While Aulus Caesar marched overland with 4 legions, burning the territory of the Bruceri, Germanicus personally led 4 other legions in an impressive naval operation. 1,000 vessels going up the Ems River, a Roman serpent advancing through the veins of Germania. The Germans were stunned. No one expected terror to come from the waters. The landings were swift and relentless, fortifications destroyed, villages wiped off the map, scattered tribes. There was no mercy. On each banner raised there was an unspoken name, Teutoburg. And, while Caesarion ravaged the forest routes, Germanicus's army advanced like thunder hidden under the fog. Vengeance now had form, march, and standard. The forest has finally spoken, and what she said has not been forgotten. On a grey and damp morning, Germanicus's legions arrived at a clearing. But it wasn't just any clearing. It was the desecrated camp of Teutoburg. There, 6 years earlier, the children of Rome had died screaming for help that never came. The silence was absolute. There were no birds, nor wind, only the echoes of a tragedy petrified in time. Tacitus would describe years later the scene. With solemn coldness, whitish bones scattered as if time had given up burying them. Fragments of armor, broken spears, skulls embedded in trunks. The soldiers stopped. Many knelt. Some cried. Those were his brothers. There lay those who had been betrayed by Rome, by their commanders and by their gods. And now it was up to them to do justice. Germanic dismounted. He collected bones himself, washing with his own hands the mud of shame that Rome carried. He had a funeral pyre built. By torchlight, with the trees as mute witnesses, the general delivered funeral words that were not recorded but never forgotten. The soldiers followed his example, covering the field with dirt and stones. A collective tomb was born there, a silent monument that said, "Rome remembers and Rome responds." After the funeral of the Teutoburg dead, the soldiers no longer marched. On orders, they marched for revenge. The forest that once frightened them now seemed to whisper the name of every fallen legionnaire. The Germans, sensing the approaching fury, abandoned frontal battles and resorted to guerrilla warfare, quick ambushes, attacks on convoys, sabotage on Roman routes. But Germanicus already expected this. And Arminius? He watched. The architect of the massacre, the traitor who had once fought on the side of Rome, now brought the tribes together again under a new calling, to resist or disappear. It needed a great victory, something that would restore terror in the hearts of the Romans. And then the perfect opportunity arose, the Roman camp on the banks of the Visurgis River. The Germans took up positions in the sacred forest on the other side of the river. Arminius concealed his cavalry on the edges of the bush, hoping to surprise the Roman flanks. But a German defector revealed the plan, and Germanicus, cold as stone, prepared the answer. At dawn, the legions crossed the river, some swimming, others in small improvised boats. It was a scene of pure determination. Unlike Varro, Germanico formed defensive lines even before finishing the crossing. Shields locked. Firm spear. In the heart of the forest, the battle that would define Germania was about to explode. The forest breathed tension, and then, like thunder splitting the sky, the howls began. Thousands of Germanic warriors emerged from among the trees as if the forest had given birth to them. Spears in hand, eyes ablaze, wooden shields scarred by years of resistance. The initial impact was brutal. The Roman line staggered. It was as if the entire jungle had come to life and spat its ancestral fury upon the invader. But Rome was no longer the same. Centurions shouted orders, discipline imposed itself on fear, and shields closed like walls. The formation of Testudo, the legendary tortoise, advanced step by step, impenetrable, stifling the barbarian impetus with mechanical precision. The Germans beat, roared, tried to break, but Rome did not bleed easily now. The battle spread like fire in dry straw. Between trees, ditches, ravines, groups fragmented. Combats took place hand to hand, eye to eye. Germanicus fought on the front, lines, golden armor gleaming through blood and mist. On the other side, Arminius appeared like a wolf's shadow, wearing a red cloak and commanding with the fury of someone who does not accept being subjugated. But the turning point was another. The German cavalry, hidden to surprise the flanks, was itself surprised. Germanicus, always one step ahead, had sent auxiliary units around the edges. The siege was reversed. What was an ambush became a trap. The siege had been reversed. The German cavalry, caught off guard, was crushed between the forest and the Roman steel. The ground shook under hooves and screams. When the first knights were overthrown, panic began to spread like a plague among the Germanic ranks. The warriors hesitated. They looked around and saw only death approaching. Arminius knew if he didn't act now, all would be lost. Then the Cheruscan leader did the unthinkable. He personally launched himself against the Roman center. At the head of his most loyal warriors, wielding a spear ornamented with black feathers, he charged forward in a desperate charge, aiming directly at the standard of Germanicus. It was more than an offensive. It was a challenge. The Roman cavalry retreated. The infantry closed in, and in the center of the whirlpool, two men met. Germanic, firm, with a purple cloak fluttering and a sword in hand. Arminius, bloodied, his eyes burning with fury. For a brief instant, the world seemed to stop. They faced each other, Rome and Germania in human form. Germanicus threw his spear with deadly force. Arminius raised his shield, but it was a squire who jumped ahead, receiving the blow to the chest. A sacrifice. A second later, Germanicus's personal guards pushed the enemy back. The opportunity dissipated like smoke on the battlefield, and with that, the Germans' hope began to crumble. Arminius's attack failed. His human wedge broke against the living wall of Roman shields. The war cries gave way to cries of despair, and then what was combat turned into escape. The Germanic line was crumbling, each tribe trying to save its own men, its own gods, its own pride. Arminius, with a new wound in his leg, had to be carried by his guards. The hero of the forest now bled in the midst of it, dragging hope along with him. The legionnaires advanced like sledgehammers. The Roman formations crushed everything in front of them. There was no more resistance, only survival. The cavalry cut off escape routes, pushing the Germans into swamps, into thorny bushes, into oblivion, when Germanicus raised his sword and ordered the chase to end. By nightfall, the field was covered with bodies. The forest, once alive, now smelled of iron and smoke. But the victory was not just military, it was spiritual. It was symbolic. The field of Idistaviso, destined to be the new Teutoburg, had become Rome's altar of vengeance. Roman eagles rose under the grey sky as the last Germanic howls vanished among the branches. Rome had won, but the price of victory would be told. In nightmares, in memories etched in the eyes of those who fought, the shame of Teutoburg was washed away with blood. With the victory at Idistaviso, Germanicus continued his campaign for a few weeks. He punished the tribes that supported Arminius, persecuted the survivors, burned villages, recovered 2 of the 3 lost eagles. the sacred symbols that Rome would never leave behind. But when the summer was over, the general knew that the empire demanded more than steel. It required prudence. His legions, exhausted, were recalled. As Rome crossed the Rhine, it bled less, but it was not healed. Tiberius, distant and cold, received the news with discomfort. Germanicus was now a national hero, loved by the people, acclaimed by the soldiers. His popularity grew like a torch in a dark night, and for a suspicious emperor, too much torch turns into fire. In 17 AD, he ordered his return. In Rome, Germanicus celebrated a magnificent triumph. Prisoners were paraded, eagles were deposited in the temple of Mars Ultor, and the people acclaimed the man who avenged Rome. But 2 years later, Germanicus would be dead in Syria, poisoned, many said on Tiberius's orders. As for Arminius, the liberator of the Germans, he was killed by his own relatives, accused of desiring to become king. Rome's vengeance was complete, but incomplete. Germania would never become a Roman province. The Rhine would become the eternal frontier, and the memory of Teutoburg, with its ghosts, its lost eagles, and its white bones in the shade of the trees, would become legend. Rome avenged her children, but no vengeance can raise the dead. The story of Rome's revenge after Teutoburg is proof that even the world's most powerful empire can bleed, but also rise again with relentless fury. Germanicus not only led legions, he carried on his back the honor of a wounded civilization. His campaign was more than war. It was justice with sword in hand. Teutoburg would never be forgotten, and the world would never underestimate Rome again. If you've come this far, it's because you've felt, even for an instant, the weight of wounded honor, the cry for justice, and the echo of untold history. This video was made with hours of research, writing, and dedication to deliver you something much greater than entertainment, a real, intense, transformative experience. If this touched you in any way, reciprocate with a simple gesture. Leave your like now. This helps the channel continue to bring to light stories that time has tried to erase. And sign up, because the next chapters of this journey will move you even more. You're not just watching a video, you are becoming part of the legion that rescues the past and transforms the present.